Hi, I'm the amateur logician. I hope you are doing well. In this video, we're going to be exploring the logical distinction between type versus token, and along the way, we will engage in some philosophical considerations as it pertains to the nature of language, sentences, and most importantly for our purposes, propositions. Peirce, an important logician and philosopher, defined a token as a replica of a symbol. Usually when people introduce this topic, they start with a question like this: how many sentences are contained within this box? We have Socrates is mortal. Socrates is mortal. Well, the answer is it depends. What do you mean by that question? There is only one type of sentence, namely Socrates is mortal, and that's it. That's all that appears there. On the other hand, clearly there's two sentences, Socrates is mortal and Socrates is mortal, even though they're copies of each other. In the language of logic and philosophy, there are two tokens. So in this example, we have one type but two tokens. The two tokens instantiate the one type in this example. Tokens can differ a lot, actually. A third token might be orally saying Socrates is mortal, along with the two written sentences. Now, there's a very real sense in which we see the tokens, or hear them, but we don't see or hear the type, at least not in the same manner. The token is definitely concrete. Tokens exist in material space-time. They exist on the digital screen. They exist on paper with ink. Or we have sound waves producing the token, and so forth. However, the type is not like this, at least not exactly. It takes our intellect to recognize the type as such. To be sure, obviously, it also takes the intellect to recognize a token as instantiating a type. There's no question about that. But there's a difference. In a genuine sense, while the token is concrete, the type is abstract. It's something that can potentially be instantiated. Understanding what that means, Socrates is mortal, really understanding it, is not something that is contained within that scribble of words, so to speak, or symbols. All of this raises interesting philosophical questions. You can easily see how someone might follow Plato in terms of thinking about what it means to be abstract. The whole notion of instantiating an abstraction sounds very Platonic in any case. But let's take another look. Consider the next box. We have no men are immortal. All men are mortal. There is really one type but two tokens. Because in this sense, we're thinking about this in terms of propositions. We have the same proposition. And a proposition declares something to be or not to be the case. This sentence is very different from this sentence, but they have the same meaning. Moreover, they are propositions because they declare something to be or not to be the case. So they are the same proposition. They say the same thing. It's really essential to understand that in logic, we can theoretically represent any one proposition in infinite number of ways. For example, just by double negation and using double negation again and again. Language communicates thoughts and ideas, judgments, feelings, questions, desires. Some of language consists of propositions, and logic is about propositions and relating propositions. Now, sentences can be propositions, but not all sentences are propositions. Sentences are linguistic. Consider this example. Socrates is mortal. Socrates est mortalis. Here we have two sentence tokens of two distinct linguistic types. Still, they are nevertheless the same proposition. Again, we can represent the same proposition multiple ways. For example, using different languages. While sentences are linguistic, and they developed out of human communities, and moreover, as a linguistic type is contingent upon human language, and those conventions that developed out of a community. Propositions are extra-linguistic. And are not tied to any particular language, like English or Latin. Now, sometimes a token's reference is not clear. Consider this example. George is president. Who is that exactly referring to? There's a lot of people with that name. What kind of president? And is this time period Pacific? Or maybe it has no reference at all. Note that there can be sentence types that are not instantiated by any sentence token. For example, consider math truths. There are mathematical truths yet to be discovered by any human being. They're just waiting to be potentially discovered. So you can have sentence types that are not instantiated by any sentence token. Or you can have propositions that are not instantiated by any sentence token. Propositions and logic itself can be tricky in any case. Formal logic is exacting, clear, and precise. That's why we can have mathematical, symbolic logics. Natural reasoning, so to speak, doesn't always map exactly onto formal logic. It tends to be a lot more messy. Language itself is messy. What takes priority? I disagree with Bertrand Russell. I think natural reasoning and natural language takes priority. When we think of propositions in everyday life tend to be a lot more messy, and it really takes interpretation and insight to understand and recognize a sentence as possibly being a proposition, and then ascertaining what that proposition exactly means and how we can symbolize it into symbolic logic. Sometimes we can model the proposition in mathematical symbolic logic. Other times we can't so easily. But it nevertheless takes interpretation. It takes a good understanding of the content of what that proposition is saying before we can abstract and use a model. Anyhow, this has been an introduction to tokens, types, and some philosophical considerations of logic along the way. Please consider subscribing to this YouTube channel if you're interested in this type of content. There are various playlists, for example, on my YouTube channel. There's a playlist on inductive logic. There's another one that's an entire course on basic symbolic logic. It has about 50 videos. And you can visit my website at amateurlogician.com. If you like this video, consider giving it a like. In any case, thanks for watching. I appreciate you, and I hope you continue your studies of logic and philosophy because those are important topics to study. See you next time. Bye for now.